we think this is going to turn around, and are struck that we're higher than those last two big lows, even after all of the pressure recently on Bitcoin and the soaring of the gold price. So we expect Bitcoin to gold to turn around, and we expect it to happen both ways. The Bitcoin price going up and the gold price going down.
Let's start with the U.S. dollar. Over the past year, many analysts have claimed that American economic dominance, often called U.S. exceptionalism, is fading. The narrative goes like this: the dollar is weakening, inflation is entrenched, and the global financial system is shifting away from the United States. But Cathie Wood doesn't see it that way. From a technical perspective, she notes that the dollar has held key support levels. In market terms, support is a price level where buyers tend to step in and prevent further declines. That stability suggests something important. Instead of collapsing, the dollar may be preparing for its next move upward.
Please take a little time to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on post notifications for more videos like this. You can also check out our other videos on cryptocurrencies and the overall digital asset space, and drop your comments and observations in the comments section below. Everything you do helps with the YouTube algorithm and immensely contributes to the channel's growth. Thanks, and enjoy the video.
You can see where we are today. We're not at the bottom of the range. Many people used last year's decline to say U.S. exceptionalism is dead, the dollar's in decline, and I think, as you can see, it has held at what technicians would call support. And I really think its next big move is to the upside. And that will help with our negative inflation story here in the United States. But the burden of proof is on us, of course. So here's the next one, moving into monetary policy. Interestingly, the purple line there is M2 growth on a year-over-year basis. It has slipped from 4.6% to 4.3% I think that's a January reading. And the CPI, not as clear here, but the CPI also came in lower than expected. It was 0.2% month to month, so that's a 2.4% annualized rate, and it's a 2.4% year-over-year rate. Now, one of the questions we're asking is, okay, velocity helped us when money growth went negative. Velocity picked up dramatically, the rate at which money turns over. Velocity is flattening out, but if our estimate for the first quarter is right, it's probably not declining. And that's important because 4.3% year-over-year growth in money, if velocity were declining, would take some of the power out of that money growth. If velocity were down 1%, for example, on a year-over-year basis, then real GDP, given the 4.3% M2 increase, nominal GDP would be up only 3.3%, not leaving very much room for growth and inflation to coexist. And as you know, we think real growth is going to dominate and that inflation is going to fade away. Talk about S&P relative to gold. There are some strategists out there that I respect highly who keep a close eye on this metric out of fear that we're going to end up in a 70s-style inflationary bust. We don't think we are. We think gold's ahead of it itself, and that the war here has caused some perturbations in the S&P, and so we expect this one to turn back around. And we're encouraged by the next one. Until recently, S&P relative to oil was near an all-time high. And you can see where we are at today's oil price. So it's come down a bit, but still near its high. Doesn't look anything like it did during the 70s. Here is Bitcoin to gold. Of course, we're very focused on the new global monetary system, which we believe is Bitcoin. We think this is going to turn around, and are struck that we're higher than those last two big lows, even after all of the pressure recently on Bitcoin and the soaring of the gold price. So we expect Bitcoin to gold to turn around, and we expect it to happen both ways: the Bitcoin price going up and the gold price going down. And this is the chart that I still noodle over. It's just, my goodness, metals to gold. Gold hitting all-time highs and moving up so rapidly certainly is a part of this story. But typically metals would have followed by now, and they haven't. Sure, some of them are up. Copper crossed $6, now it's back below. But we expect this to close maybe both ways, with interest rates coming down as more and more investors understand that we might be going into a negative inflation environment, and the metals to gold chart will turn up as the gold price comes down and metal prices participate in this budding, rolling recovery. So stay tuned on that one. These are three banks. You can see the ones that we've mentioned below. And you can see that the private credit drama is not playing out in bank credit default swaps. The banks are not exposed to this particular crisis. And so that's reassuring, because anytime we see a crisis out there, defaults, fraud, and so forth, we wonder, is the banking system going to be impacted here? And so far, that answer is no. And the same is true more broadly for high-yield debt. So junk bonds relative to 10-year Treasury securities, that spread is near its all-time low. So not seeing any problems there as well. So that's quite reassuring.
To assess systemic risk, Wood looks at indicators like credit default swaps, which function like insurance policies against financial failure. If markets believe banks were in trouble, these insurance costs would surge. But they haven't. Credit default swaps for major banks remain relatively calm, suggesting the banking system is not heavily exposed to private credit risks. Similarly, the spread between high-yield junk bonds and U.S. Treasury bonds remains near historic lows. If investors feared widespread defaults, those spreads would widen dramatically. So far, they haven't. This suggests that while private credit may face turbulence, it is unlikely to destabilize the broader financial system.
In terms of how the future will play out, I don't think if this regime somehow manages to hold on, that the world will be that much different. So I guess we're looking at status quo or a big surprise in terms of growth and innovation on the upside of expectations. So that's Iran. Private credit is the other worry today. There's about $1.8 trillion in private credit today, and a lot of it is in interval funds and funds that don't allow full redemption at any time. They might allow inflows, but not redemptions. And I think because of a few bankruptcies, highly publicized bankruptcies, one clearly related to fraud, this market has become unsettled. Just today, BlackRock decided not to satisfy the 7.9% in redemptions from its largest private credit fund. It only allowed 5%. I might be wrong on that 7.9%. There may have been requests for 9.3%. In fact, I think that's right, 9.3%. They only allowed 5%, so roughly half. So there are a lot of nervous individuals who thought they were buying funds that were guaranteeing dividends in the 10 to 12% range, and they just felt safe. It was bond-like. But whenever you see outsized guarantees like that, 10, 11% dividend yields, when the treasury yield out there is 4%, you have to know you're taking some kind of risk. And the risk here is bankruptcies. Now, these companies have been used to adjustable rates. These interest rates go up with the Fed funds rate. But I think the problem now, since many of these companies started and or were funded around COVID, we're now in the 5 to 7 year window where they'll want to roll over the debt, and that's not going to be possible in this new world. Many of these companies are being disrupted by technology. SaaS is a great example. A lot of private credit and private equity firms started buying SaaS companies. Well, guess what? SaaS is being disrupted by the frontier models out there right now and by platform as a service companies like Palantir. So 11 to 12% dividend yields, those were not risk-free at all. And so here we're learning, again, an important lesson. Now, one of the things we have to ask as far as private credit goes is, could there be a systemic problem? Systemic usually involves the banking system, the highly leveraged banking system. And what we're learning is the banks are not, at least as far as we know so far, highly exposed to this area of the market. We can see this in the market as well from credit default swaps on individual banks. They have remained very low. So credit default swaps are insurance policies against something going really wrong with these banks. And I'll show you in a chart in a few minutes that CDSs are very well behaved in the banking sector. And in the high yield world, so this is junk bonds, if you look at the spreads of those yields relative to treasury yields, those are also very well behaved. And given the amount of drama taking place out there, you would think if there were to be a systemic problem, that those CDSs and the high yields would pick up on it. So we're feeling pretty good about that. And then before we get to the charts, I'll just talk a little bit about an aha moment we had this week here in St. Petersburg. We had our offsite, so we had partners from around the world, Japan, Taiwan, Korea, Australia, I think, was represented, many countries in Europe, the UK, and our partners here in the US come to visit us so that they could be steeped in our research. And as we were walking around and making introductions, it was very clear that there was, I call it a PC moment. In 1980, when IBM put out its first PC and Apple put out Lisa, many people probably don't even know about Lisa, there was this kind of a moment where everybody in the firm gathered around a desk to see what this was and, to marvel at it, at what it could do. And back then, all it could do was really addition and subtraction and very low-level things. And look where we are now. Well, we had the same moment with Claude, the Claude, I think it's Claude Work or Claude Code Work, where someone on our finance team was just blown away by how quickly he was able to automate all of these automation projects that he had lined up over the past 6 months. We're on Palantir, and so we're certainly going to integrate all of that with Palantir. But he was able to do this individually, and he was shocked, and everyone around him was shocked at how beautiful the graphics were, the tables, and how perfect they were. And even cross-checking the numbers with some manual additions, subtractions, percentages, they were correct. So another PC-like moment, and that PC-like moment was 46 years ago. So technology, disruptive innovation, we've been waiting for many, many years, slowly, then all at once, for these technologies that we've been focusing on, the seeds of which were planted in the 20 years that started with the PC and ended with the tech and telecom bubble and bust. Those seeds were planted. They weren't ready to flourish. They've been germinating. We got the cloud in 2006. We got the first really big breakthrough in AI in decades, so deep learning, ImageNet.
So what's the big takeaway from Cathie Wood's outlook? While many investors are focused on inflation, financial instability, and geopolitical risks, she believes the real story is innovation-driven growth. In her view, the U.S. dollar may strengthen, inflation could fade faster than expected, financial markets remain more stable than headlines suggest, and disruptive technologies, especially AI and blockchain, may unleash a new wave of productivity. If that scenario plays out, the global economy could enter a period of rapid transformation, similar to the technological boom that followed the personal computer revolution. And for investors, the biggest opportunities may lie in embracing innovation rather than fearing disruption.